Today's topic is UN Special Rapporteurs. To introduce the topic, the emergence of a special rapporteurship on several subjects can be said to have originated from the core foundations of United Nations vis-à-vis human rights. Theoretically, there is good connection between the fundamentals of United Nations and modern jurisprudence on human rights. For example, arbitrary deprivation of lives is something that inherently is opposed to modern ethos of international law. One can refer to the Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Article 3 is credited to have laid down norms and rules of general international laws. The wholesome approach of the Universal Declaration recognizes the right to life as key component of UN Covenant and source of several other international provisions on rights. It is this philosophical premise that has created ample room for denouncing any multiple or gross violations of the right to life as nothing short of a war crime or crime against humanity. Harping on such a protective concern, UN forged various treaties, bodies, commissions, procedures, mechanisms, etc. To cite some examples, in the words of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, human rights are an inherent right. Similarly, an Article 4 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights recognize the importance of right to life. At the very outset, we will look into the origin of special rapporteurs. Against the above backdrop of ever-increasing will to protect human rights, the idea of appointing special rapporteurs became imminent. The establishment of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, also known as UNCHR, in 1946 actualized the international concern for the protection of human rights. As the concern broadened, the UNCHR felt the need to create systems for the protection of human rights. Thus, new treaties were signed and mechanisms were created. The provision for establishing special rapporteurs are materialized through the systems such as the thematic mandate or special procedure. However, the creation of special procedures had been a much delayed subject. The delay reflected a belief by many of the state members of the UN that scrutiny of any individual state's human rights practices constituted improper intervention in matters essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of states, as excluded by Article 2, Clause 7 of the Charter of the UN. The UNCHR finally resolved to appoint its first special rapporteur in 1979. The first special rapporteur was entrusted with the responsibility to report on abuses in Chile under the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship. This initiative established an important precedent for instituting special procedures to examine serious human rights violations in any country of the world. Working on the same track of world's diplomacy, particularly on human rights, in 1982, a thematic rapporteurship was set up to examine summary and arbitrary executions. Till about 2002, there had been about 41 special rapporteurs, 30 on thematic issues, and 11 working in specific countries. Let us examine who are special rapporteurs. Without understanding special procedures within the UN system, explicating the nature and genesis of special rapporteurs is impossible. The United Nations is mainly endowed with two sets of human rights monitoring procedures. First, those established under human rights treaties, and second, those initiated under the aegis of UNCHR, which are also called special procedures or extra-conventional mechanisms or charter-based bodies. The second procedure may be further divided into country-specific and thematic mechanisms. As a part of these mechanisms, what we call a special procedure, we find the special rapporteurs. Now, let us question, what do they do? Special rapporteurs are in charge of holding inquiries into violations and to intervene on specific issues or urgent situations. They play an important role in the protection of human rights. They are independent, sit individually, and cannot be appointed for more than 6 years. Their mission is to study and draft a report on a country's situation about human rights. Among the main responsibilities, rapporteurs are in charge of receiving information from different sources such as the governments, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, victims of human rights violations, and witnesses. The operational status of the rapporteurs originates from the office of the UNCHR, only to be succeeded by United Nations Human Rights Council in 2006. Special rapporteurs have been appointed for various countries such as in Afghanistan, Iraq, Myanmar, Palestinian territories occupied by Israel since 1967, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Congo, Sudan, Burundi, Cambodia, Somalia, Haiti, and India. The following are some select thematic rapporteurs: a special rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions, special rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers, a special rapporteur on the question of torture, a special rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. In addition, there are several rapporteurs on the sale of children, violence against women, right to education, right to food, situation of human rights and fundamental freedoms of indigenous people, etc. Following two are the fundamental objectives of the rapporteurship. Number 1, sending urgent appeals to prevent possible imminent violations, and 2, undertake sport visits to countries with apparent or extensive problems with the permission of the state in question. The chair, in consultation with the members of UNHRC, appoints specialist rapporteurs. The quality of appointees depends largely on the ability and acumen of the chair. The UNCHR instituted a term limit of 6 years for experts. It is extremely unlikely to assign special rapporteurs who do not have at least the acquiescence of their own governments and political realities. Dwelling upon the need for democratizing the appointment of rapporteurs, several civil society organizations since the UNCHR's 58th session in spring 2002 have criticized the growing politicization of the appointment process. To discuss some select special rapporteurs, the scope and coverage of special rapporteurs are multiple, as there are separate thematic rapporteurs on health, education, food, water, torture, indigenous peoples, poverty, etc. The following are some selected fields where special rapporteurs work as an important instrument for human rights all over the world. Special rapporteur on the right to health. The right to health is actually the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. This right was first articulated in the 1946 Constitution of the World Health Organization. The intervention of the rapporteurs is to see if everyone has achieved the highest sustainable standard of physical and mental health. The special rapporteurs on the right to food. The right to food is the most fundamental right to be made sure for all. The special rapporteur is to ensure adequate and sufficient food on the basis of one's corresponding cultural traditions. The special rapporteurs on extreme poverty and human rights. The key objective of the rapporteur is to identify approaches for removing all obstacles to the full enjoyment of human rights for people living in extreme poverty. She makes recommendations on how persons living in extreme poverty can participate in the definition of measures affecting them. The special rapporteurs on torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. The special rapporteur, by visiting countries and publishing reports, give us some useful information. His mission is to prevent and stop torture and dialogue for national preventive mechanisms. For example, Mr. Juan Mendes is the special rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment since 2010. To sum up, there are several other special rapporteurs which include special rapporteurs on human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, special rapporteurs on contemporary forms of slavery, education and adequate housing, etc. Now it is important and interesting equally to discuss about India in the eyes of the special rapporteurs. The UN Special Rapporteur against Violence on Women, Rashida Manju, was in India on a 10-day visit from April 22nd to till May 1st, 2013. Her findings are an eye-opening as far as the situation of human rights, particularly the rights of women, is concerned. Manju endorsed the fact that the implication of Armed Forces Special Powers Act (AFSPA) 1958 and rampant indulgence of National Security Act (NSA) has rather perpetuated impunity, while at the same time widely used as a containment mechanism against human rights defenders in India. In her opinion, I quote, "The consistent violence under AFSPA indicates India's violation of international laws," unquote. According to Rashida Manju, in conflict areas such as the northeastern states and Jammu and Kashmir, people face a grim situation of human rights, as there are extraordinary laws that protect the armed forces from effective prosecution in non-military courts for human rights violations committed against civilian women and others. Her findings reveal, I quote, "In the testimonies received, it was clear that the interpretation and implementation of such act is eroding fundamental rights and freedoms, including freedom of movement, association and peaceful assembly, safety and security, dignity and bodily integrity rights for women in Jammu and Kashmir and in the northeastern states," unquote. Rashida Manjoo did not fail to draw the attention of the government of India in the wake of Gujarat massacre of 2002 as induced by religious intolerance, which directly affected women and children in large numbers. It is also noteworthy to mention that the UN Special Rapporteur acknowledged the government of India for having signed and ratified numerous international human rights instruments. According to her, despite India's recent attempt to materialize progressive laws and policies at the union and state levels, including amendment of the Indian Penal Code, which broadly includes crime against women, there are continuing crime against women. Recalling the earlier relevant recommendations of March 2012 by UN Human Rights Council and UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary execution, Rashida Manjoo observed that the implementation of AFSPA should be positively repealed. Most of the rapporteurs visiting India have repeatedly recommended fuller implementation of UN norms with further initiatives on sex ratio, domestic violence, atrocities against scheduled tribes and scheduled caste, child marriage, etc. During her visit, Rashida Manjoo held meetings in New Delhi, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Manipur and Tamil Nadu, where she gathered written testimonies. Her findings are expected to be presented to the United Nations Human Rights Council in June 2014. Too many governments do not reply or delay responding to requests for a mission. Special rapporteurs take pains to maintain their independence, impartiality and objectivity to weigh their information on human rights provided by governments and civil society groups, and to report fully on the progress made and obstacles faced. Regarding the appointment also, there are multiple criticisms. The expertise of candidates often remains subservient to the stature of a candidate's acceptability and qualification. Therefore, criticisms have also arisen with regard to the advisability of appointing special rapporteurs who originate from the same region in which their mandate is located. The rapporteurs face a stiff challenge in fulfilling the expectations from their office and maintaining reasonable relations with the alleged host states. The UN Special Rapporteurs have expressed dissatisfaction over their wages and financial support. To conclude, there is no denying the fact that the special rapporteurs promote ratification of UN human rights treaties, while at the same time enhancing procedures of monitoring and receiving complaints. The special rapporteur studies the impact of discrimination and participates in the assessment of the implementation of UN declarations. Today, the importance of a special procedure within UN has become so important that it has created 19 different special procedures. It is a renowned fact that the culprit states do not generally display honest response to the critical issues that a rapporteur brings out through his or her findings and discourses. As a result of this apathy, often turning into an impossibility of things, crucial and meaningful attempts made through this precious procedure has left human rights all over the world endangered. Special rapporteurs are expected to still carry forward the world's concern for protection of human rights and justice. Human rights for people who are yet to be liberated from the shackles of oppressed living conditions appear to be distant dream despite their continuous struggle. Therefore, the UN Special Rapporteurs will have to deliver more and more in the times to come.